talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farrow.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And welcome to another edition of On the Money, where we're focused on the UK's cost of living crisis, helping you to beat the squeeze. I'm Liam Halligan, and for the next hour, we'll be talking about wages across the UK. Pay is up, rising at its fastest pace in almost 15 years. But once you consider inflation, the rising cost of living, real wages are sharply down. How can we tackle this fall in purchasing power? What should the government do? We also discuss food waste, as tens of millions of pounds of perfectly good crops are being squandered across Britain due to a lack of staff to pick, process and pack them. You heard it here first. All that and more on The Money after the GB News headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon. It's just 1 minute past 1. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. New figures have shown wages are falling at their fastest rate since records began more than 2 decades ago. The ONS say growth in regular pay, excluding bonuses, was 4.7% between April and June. Now, when taking into account rising prices, the real value, though, of wages fell by 3%. Household budgets are being stretched by increasing prices of food, energy and fuel. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says this is further evidence of the mounting pressure on millions of people.
Well, look, this is further pressure on so many families, so many working people. And this wage stagnation has been going on for 10 years. So I really understand just how people are struggling. It's one of the reasons that we announced our energy price freeze yesterday, to keep those bills down and to make the choice that the oil and gas companies in the North Sea should pay a windfall tax to help people who are struggling through this winter period. So it's further evidence, I think, of the pressure that so many millions of people are under.
A depot in Russian-occupied Crimea has been hit by a series of explosions. Moscow's claiming the blasts were caused by sabotage following a series of attacks last week on Russian warplanes along the Crimean coast. Ukraine hasn't admitted to that attack. Well, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling on world leaders to help force Russian troops to withdraw from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station in southeastern Ukraine. The UK government says it's confident the new COVID-19 vaccine will be available as part of the autumn booster programme. Britain's the first country in the world to approve a jab that targets both the original strain of COVID-19 and the Omicron variant. Ministers confirmed that 26 million people eligible for an autumn booster will have access to one of the next generation jabs. Home testing kits for bowel cancer are going to be offered to over 58-year-olds in England in a bid to ensure that more cases are detected earlier. NHS England has committed to offering the test to all 50-year-olds by 2025. People will be sent the test in the post. If any abnormalities are detected, they'll be invited for further checks. The Conservative leadership candidates have vowed to better scrutinise the Scottish Government if they become the next Prime Minister. Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak will face off again in another hustings in Perth this evening. Both have stated their opposition to a referendum on Scottish independence. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has committed to getting Scotland's economy moving. The former Chancellor Rishi Sunak wants there to be greater scrutiny of Scottish civil servants and for the country to be more accountable, whilst calling for all unions to work together. Well, Conservative MP Andrew Bowie believes that Rishi Sunak is the ideal candidate for Scotland to remain in the UK.
And it's my view that Rishi Sunak is best placed to ensure Scotland's place at the heart of our United Kingdom for years to come. That's why I'm backing him. We need to ensure that the UK government is as representative and as, stands up for Scottish people as it does for people across the rest of the United Kingdom. That's one way that we're going to ensure Scotland remains at the heart of the UK. But the other is by taking the SNP on at the ballot box and beating them.
The body of a teenage girl's been found after she got into difficulty in water on Monday near Manchester. Police say they're confident her death isn't suspicious. A yellow thunderstorm warning is in place for most of the UK. That alert will stay in place for southern England until tomorrow. The forecast rain isn't enough to remedy weeks of dry weather. A drought's been declared in Yorkshire today. That region now joins 8 areas of England which were moved into drought status last week. Ryanair have said they're going to add more than 500 flights with a total of 100,000 seats to and from London Stansted for the October half-term break. Well, they made the announcement after Heathrow Airport extended its cap of 100,000 passengers a day until the end of October. The limit was initially implemented to reduce large queues as well as lost baggage and last-minute cancellations as the travel industry struggled to cope with staffing shortages. A fuel tax on domestic flights could help freeze train fares and raise over £1 billion a year, according to the Campaign for Better Transport. The group says taxing aviation fuel at the same rate as petrol and diesel would make enough money to scrap the annual rail fare increase. They also say it would help cut carbon emissions. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head to Liam for today's On the Money.
And coming up on the money today, wages across Britain are rising on average, but also falling. How can that be? Because higher pay is being more than wiped out by inflation, the rising cost of living. So real wages are going down at their fastest pace on record. How can Britain tackle our nose-diving real wages, our plummeting purchasing power? As ever, on the money, a detailed discussion with people who really know their stuff. Plus, over £60 million worth of food has been wasted over the last 6 months due to a lack of workers to pick, pack and process crops. But why are we having to throw away food when more and more of us are cash-strapped and struggling to feed ourselves? We'll hear from farmers across the country. And today sees the return of our regular Startup Britain feature. We speak to a clothes designer who's left the fast fashion industry in favour of slow fashion, aiming to create clothes that can stand the test of time. That's later in the show. And as ever, let me know what you think of the issues raised in today's On the Money. How do they impact you? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet @gbnews. And don't forget to subscribe to our fabulous GB News YouTube channel. I'll read out some of your messages later in the show, so stay with us because this is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and you're on the money. Now, real wages allowing for the cost of living are falling at their fastest pace for 20 years. That's according to official data released this morning. Now, actual pay in terms of pounds and pence is rising and fast, up almost 5% on average over the last year. That's the fastest pay growth in 15 years. But once you consider inflation, the cost of living increase, what you can actually buy for your money, given the rise in prices over the last year, wages are sharply down. What economists call real wages, wages after inflation, are now 3% lower than last year, according to the Office for National Statistics. And that's the fastest rate of real wage contraction on record. Household budgets are being hit hard now by soaring energy bills, as well as higher food and fuel costs. That's why, even though average wages are rising, so many of us feel poorer, because meeting the cost of those necessities is taking up more and more of our money. Between April and June this year, The average wage across the UK economy was 4.7% higher than the same 3-month period the year before. But the latest data shows that in June, the Consumer Price Index was 9.4% higher than last year. So wages are rising at just half the rate that prices are going up. And that's why so-called real wages, allowing for inflation, were 3% down between April and June compared to last year, the sharpest drop in at least 2 decades. Now, this is, of course, a cost of living crisis, but I'd say more accurately, it's a cost of lockdown crisis. Why is inflation so high? Because having been locked down for the best part of 2 years, the world remains riddled with serious supply chain shortages, which is a big reason that prices everywhere are rising. After being shuttered for so long, the global economy is yet to fully reboot and struggling to produce what we need. And as demands roar back post-lockdown, these ongoing supply issues are pushing prices up. The UK in particular is also suffering from serious labour shortages, again adding to price pressures. There are still over 1 million vacancies as firms scramble to find the workers they need with the right skills in the right part of the country. These labour shortages are keeping wages high, but the impact of that on firms' costs is even greater. Another reason why wages are rising, but more slowly than prices, making this cost of living squeeze even tighter. The reality is the average person would have needed to secure a pay rise of about 3.5 grand to keep up with the rise in inflation and taxes over the last 12 months. So unless you got that, your pay over the last year's gone down. And many millions, of course, will have had no pay rise at all. Tumbling real wages not only cause human misery and even poverty, but the drop in purchasing power will ultimately bring economic stagnation, making a bad situation worse. So what is the answer? How can we tackle this ghastly situation? And that's our On the Money question today. How to reverse this nosedive in UK wages. Grown-up conversation with people who know their stuff here on my show. That's what we do. And on cue, here's Nikki Jolly making a return to On the Money. She's Managing Director of HR Today, a consultancy firm in the North East. Nikki, always good to have you with us, bringing your insights from Darlington. Luke Hildyard's back. He's Executive Director at the High Pay Centre. And regular economist Victoria Scholar, Head of Investment at Interactive Investor, joins us in the studio. Great to have you with us, Victoria. Let's go to you first, Luke. You analyse pay for a living. I tried hard to explain in my opening remarks. We've been trying all day on GBNews to explain why wages are going up but going down at the same time. It's quite a complex picture, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But I thought your introduction kind of said it all, really. But one thing I'd just add is that the Resolution Foundation, who look at a number of different historical sources, say it's the fastest fall in real pay since the Queen's Silver Jubilee. Bearing in mind this year it's the Platinum Jubilee, 45 years on. I think that gives a sense of the kind of historic awfulness of the moment. And it's perhaps worth iterating as well. What does this actually mean? People going out and working for a living are able to buy less and less for the money they earn, despite all the advances we're seeing in science and technology around the world. People's lives in Britain are becoming materially poorer at the moment. And that's obviously a really terrible state of affairs. As to your kind of essay question, what can be done about it? I think we need to start questioning a lot of the assumptions about managing the economy that have underpinned economic strategy over the past few years. Things like holding down benefits, holding down public sector pay, weakening trade unions in the private sector haven't been terribly good for living standards, and we need to think sort of boldly and radically about unwinding and changing those practices, and frankly doing the exact opposite.
Victoria, let's turn to you. You're very much a market-driven person. You look at the macro economy. I mean, Luke Hildyard, he really focuses on pay inequality. He's highlighting the differences at the lower end of the labour market, the higher end of the labour market. Of course, many well-off people are doing pretty well. They did very well during lockdown, staying at home, not having to commute, the so-called laptop classes. But as a whole, if an economy is suffering from a lack of purchasing power, and that's what falling real wages are, it's not great, is it?
No, it's not. Essentially, what it means is that businesses will make it a lot harder to make profits because costs are going up. That might mean that they're able to employ fewer staff. That means that those employees are potentially going to be earning less in terms of wages. And it also means that the government is then going to be receiving less in tax receipts because there's going to be less consumption in the economy with squeezed budgets, meaning that we can't go out there and go shopping or spend on all the things that we like to spend on. So it really is a difficult situation that ripples through the entire economy.
Let's turn to you now, Nikki Jolly. We often talk to you here on The Money. You're based up there in the Northeast. You are part of a recruitment agency, a specialist recruitment agency. You really focus on the industries that are germane to the Northeast. You employ or help to employ a lot of skilled workers. It strikes me there is a bit of a fundamental mismatch here in the UK economy. Lots and lots of vacancies, of course. That's one reason why pay is going up, because workers are able to, the employers are competing for workers. On the other hand, there are many people, many employees who can't get the people that they need because the workers are in the wrong part of the country or they haven't got the skills. Is that what you're seeing in the Northeast?
I mean, predominantly we deal with the HR element of it. So what I would say is we're starting to see the squeeze with our companies. We deal with medium-sized companies that are struggling to maintain the wages and the required wages that are coming. We've already started to see an increase in redundancies. ACAS did a survey recently that by Christmas, a high percentage of organisations, certainly in the North East, will be going through redundancy processes. The problem we've got is, yes, everything is going up. People have put wages up. I personally have put my wages up on an average over the last 2 years by 30%. And I'm what I would class as a small employer. We employ less than 10 employees, but we work across the array of manufacturing, GPs. We work across all sectors. And the problem we've got is the medium to small companies can't sustain the increases that are required to keep their staff. So this is causing the skill shortage of people not being able to recruit what they need. So something's got to give. And unfortunately, my prediction will be is we will lose a lot of organisations, because even in my service in my sector as a service, I can't put my prices up. I have clients on 3 and 5 year contracts that are fixed on their prices. So I can't put my prices up, but I'm still offering the service at higher cost to me. So like I say, I think over the next couple of years, we're going to see a lot of the smaller companies, they're just not going to survive, which will then lose more jobs, and we'll have even more people on benefits, and more jobs will hopefully get filled as a result of that. But it's going to be a slow, painful process. And I really do think, I'm not sure the answer, I'll be honest. I don't know what the answer is. But at the moment, I do feel the employees are dictating the wages to the employers, and to survive, they're having to listen and adapt. But that can't last forever. So people are employing people on salaries now that they will not be able to sustain. So they will end up getting rid of them or closing the business at a later future date. So it is a huge problem, particularly from a HR point of view. We talk with directors all the time, asking them, what can we do? How can we help them? And, everybody is struggling with what the answer is, to be honest. And people are just surviving. So they're doing what they have to do now. But over the next 6, 12 months, 2 years, they will be making very different decisions, I believe.
Luke Hildyard, I'm sure you will have listened respectfully there to Nikki Jolly. She knows what she's on about. She really is at the coalface of in the employment sector. She knows her part of the country extremely well. And she's saying that a lot of small and medium-sized businesses she works with, they just can't sustain these higher wage levels. Now, you are respectfully a campaigner for wage equality. You highlight the egregious nature of some high pay as you see it. But you must recognise that, there are lots of decent people running decent businesses that we need to survive in this country, whose very futures, not their personal futures, more than that, the futures of their ability to employ people is being threatened, not least in areas like the northeast of England that need to take part in our national prosperity, because in previous generations, they often haven't.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's really sobering to listen to Nikki and sort of very fascinating to hear what she has to say, which I wouldn't disagree with at all. I think the problem is that, as she says, the pay rises are very difficult for particularly small and medium sized employers to bear. But as we're seeing in the statistics today, there's still not enough for the employees to be earning more than for their pay to be increasing by more than the cost of living. So it's a really painful situation for everyone. I think what I would highlight, and you kind of touched on it with your remarks on wage inequality, is that it's not sort of the same experience for everyone. You could look at the pay growth for different income groups, and it's only the top 1%, the richest 1%, who've seen their incomes grow in real terms since the furlough schemes ended last October. Since the pandemic, the profits of the largest firms, the FTSE 100, the biggest companies in Britain, I think not so much the firms that Nikki works with, their profits are up 34%. The total wealth of the top 20 billionaires on the Sunday Times rich list has jumped by 30 billion, and that's just 20 households, their wealth up by 30 billion. So not everybody is doing badly, and I think there's great potential to raise living standards by trying to balance things out a bit more fairly, which we just don't talk about nearly enough. I think it's crazily unrealistic to think that we can just magic up higher incomes and greater wealth for people in the middle and at the bottom without having to do anything to address the excess wealth and incomes of those at the top. And again, I think it'd be really good if government and commentators started to recognise that a bit.
Points well made, Luke. Something else I think we should recognise, Victoria Scholar, is the gap between private and public sector wages. Now, I've been looking at the coverage of these ONS statistics pretty much all day, listening to other broadcasters and newspapers and so on. And I keep seeing this headline, public sector pay lags behind private sector pay. And it's true, if you look down into the numbers, private sector pay has gone up 5.9% on average in between April and June compared to the 3 months the previous year, whereas public sector pay, state workers, has gone up 1.8% on average. That's why we get to an overall figure of about 5.5%, because the vast majority of people work in the private sector, about 80% of us. Having said that, even though public sector pay is going up by less, when you look at the numbers, and no one ever says this, public sector pay, direct comparisons, is 15% higher on average than private sector pay.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really interesting. I'd say that what we've seen in terms of the private sector is that employees have got a lot of bargaining power at the moment, and they might not even realise how much bargaining power they have because there have been very high job vacancies. The overall employment market has been very, very tight because we've had the so-called Great Resignation after COVID, when a lot of people on the cusp of retirement decided not to return to the workforce, and a lot of young potential employees looked at the dire global situation and thought, I'm going to go into higher education or do something else and defer my movement into the labour market. So there's been a real shortage of workers, and Brexit has contributed to that as well. So all of that has meant that there's a shortage of workers, so workers can actually bid for much higher wages. So potentially that has been reflected a little bit more in terms of the private sector than the public sector. Yeah.
But it's not true to say that the private sector is better off, because on average private sector wages are lower than public sector wages, and that's something we very rarely hear.
Yeah, you're right. It's probably a statistic that isn't really talked about enough. I agree.
Nikki, let's go back to you briefly before we go to the break. We are going to carry on this discussion after the break. Let's go back to my initial question that I posed. How can we reverse this nosedive in wages? You've made very powerful points about the reality for small and medium-sized firms trying to keep up with these wage rises. What more do you want to see policy-wise to try and do what I know in your heart you want to do? Deliver better wages for your workers and better deals for your employers.
Crikey, that's a difficult one. But if I could touch on the public sector, it's also the benefits that the public sector get as well compared to private. I sadly lost an employee to the public sector a couple of years ago, and monetary wise we could match everything, The reality is they get 15% pension contributions, they get 30 days holiday. Those are the things that we can't compete with as a small company. And unfortunately, I did lose him after 5 years of working with us. So from a public and a private sector, there is a disparity. And as you know, in the North East area, we've got the Treasury coming up here advertising these fantastic, great jobs with great benefits. So again, that's not helping us in the North East, although it is bringing attention and levelling up to the North East. What would I like to see? In all honesty, companies just keeping in there, talking together, working together. Let's see if we can create a community to support each other and try and standardise some of the things out there. So I've increased my holidays this year for my team. I've increased salaries. We've done what we can do. And I think as a North East, we've always proven that we will club together, we will work together and we'll create a community. But I think it's about the employees being realistic and looking at long term. I think the employees need to start realising this can't sustain, and jumping from one job to another may end up with them actually not having a job in the future. So I ask for the employees to start working with the employers and look at the other benefits of working with a company, you know, that you are known, liked, trusted, valued. It's not always working for the bigger companies where on paper looks better, but realistically it's about work-life balance, it's about feeling valued and part of a family, which the smaller to medium organisations in the North East absolutely capture. So my plea is that people look at us and say, do I have a long-term future with some of these companies? Is this what I want? And work with us and talk to us so that we can actually all recruit the right people for longevity and stop looking at these short-term visions of I can earn this money and in 6 months' time I won't have a job. I'm not sure that answers the question because I don't think
it was a fascinating response, Nikki. Nikki Jolly there of HR Today giving us some insights from Teesside. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. We're keeping this conversation going after the break. How can we reverse this nosedive in UK wages? You'll see the headlines. Wages are up at the fastest pace for 15 years, but include inflation, and they're going down. That's what we're discussing. How can that be reversed? Stay with us. You're On the Money.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GBNews.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 1:27. You're On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. We are discussing not the rise, but the fall in UK wages. Wages are going up in terms of pounds and pence, but not once you include the impact of the rising cost of living, of higher inflation. In fact, wages are falling. Real wages, post-inflation, at 3%. That's the sharpest drop on record. Let's go back to Luke Hildyard of the High Pay Centre, a member of my expert panel. Luke, just tell us a little bit more about the patterns of wages in the UK at the moment. You talked about some of the high pay. You talked about the fact that we need more bargaining power at the lower end of the wage market. But how do we get those vacancies down? How do we match the workers that employers need with people who want jobs?
Well, I think the pay has to be attractive. That's a key element to any job. And then just talking about trends, as I say, when people are saying it represents a 3% real terms fall in pay, what's happening at the moment. As I said at the outset, the Resolution Foundation estimate that that's the most significant fall in 45 years, from Jubilee to Jubilee, if you like, from the Silver Jubilee to the Platinum Jubilee. I think that one thing that we maybe haven't touched on in this discussion is that, you know, as you said at the beginning, nominal wages are up, but it's real wages that are down. People's pay isn't increasing as fast as the cost of living. So though their pay is up, they can buy less with it. So I think we need to think not just about what can be done in terms of employment policies and pay and jobs and so on, but also about how to tackle inflation. Over the longer term, I think home insulation is a really important part of that. We have scandalously inefficient homes in Britain, which means people need to spend a lot more on heating than would otherwise be the case. Obviously, you can't just sort of magic up those kind of improvements to the housing stock instantly. So in the shorter term, we need to think about improving benefits, which are mainly paid to people in work, by the way, not people, you know, even though they're working, they still can't, they're still in need of social security to cover basic living expenses. And also on in terms of the energy providers in France, the government has nationalised the EDF, the main energy provider, and is effectively sort of swallowing the cost of energy bills on behalf of the wider population, meaning their bills are only going up 4%. So I think that side of things is really, really important. Not just how do we get wages up, but how do we get costs down?
It's all about inflation, isn't it? It is really, as Luke says, Victoria, the inflation number that's driving this fall in real wages that we're discussing today. Yeah. And we've got another inflation number coming out today. 9.4% was the June increase in the Consumer Price Index compared to June 2021. 7 a.m. tomorrow, we'll get new numbers out. What do you think the number's going to be for July? Probably higher, right?
Yeah, we are looking at a higher number for tomorrow. It's expected to come in at 9.8%, but we could potentially see it tip into double digits, which of course will be a milestone. We know that the Bank of England is forecasting that inflation will top 13% by October, and the Resolution Foundation had some even higher forecasts going into next year.
Come on, inflation's much higher than 10%. It's much higher than 13%. The Consumer Price Index does not capture what's really happening, let's be honest.
No, it doesn't. And everyone actually has their own individual inflation rate. It depends on where you live in the country. It depends on what you spend your money on. But some of the inflationary pressures clearly are affecting all of us, like the energy bills being one of the key ones, grocery price inflation and fuel inflation at the petrol pump as well. But back to sort of the question of the discussion about how to get, you know, real wages under control. It really is about controlling inflation. You know, it's not about getting wages up because they are on the rise. It's about bringing inflation back down closer to target, and then wages would outpace the cost of living and rising price levels, meaning that people will actually get richer and have more money to spend at the end of the month.
All eyes on that inflation number tomorrow.
Yeah.
Victoria Scholar of Interactive Investor, great to have you with us. And indeed, Nikki Jolly of HR Today, who joined us from Darlington. A pleasure as ever. And also, of course, Luke Hildyard from the High Pay Centre. Thank you all for a detailed discussion. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. Coming up, we'll be hearing why and how, amid one of the worst cost of living crises in memory, we're wasting over £60 million worth of food in just a few months. That's after the GB News headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it's 1:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Figures have shown wages are falling at their fastest rate since records began more than 2 decades ago. The ONS say growth in regular pay, excluding bonuses, was 4.7% between April and June. When we take into account rising prices, though, the real value of wages fell by 3%. Household budgets are being stretched by increasing prices of food, energy and fuel.
We're still in the leadership contest at the moment. Now, my priority is reducing taxes so people can keep more of their own money, at the same time as making sure we boost energy supply. It's wrong to just keep sticking plasters on this problem. What we actually need to do is make sure we are unleashing more energy, for example, from the North Sea. We're investing in technologies like nuclear, and we're finding more renewable energy as well. We need to solve this problem for the long term.
That was the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss defending her party's plans to help the economy. She'll face off against Rishi Sunak at a hustings tonight in Perth. Well, talking of the cost of living, the consumer champion Jane Hawes says it's the poorest households that are being hit the hardest by the current rates of inflation.
Look, this is further pressure on so many families, so many working people. And this wage stagnation has been going on for 10 years. So I really understand just how people are struggling. It's one of the reasons that we announced our energy price freeze yesterday, to keep those bills down and to make the choice that the oil and gas companies in the North Sea should pay a windfall tax to help people who are struggling through this winter period. So it's further evidence, I think, of the pressure that so many millions of people are under.
That was Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition, giving his response to the increasing cost of living and his party's strategy. Now let's move on to the weather. And the UK can expect days, actually now, of thunder as heavy rain and flooding are set to continue. A yellow thunderstorm warning is in place for most of England and Wales. Flash flooding affected a number of areas in Scotland overnight. Now the alert will stay in place for southern England until tomorrow. Earlier, a teenage girl was found after she got into difficulty in water on Monday near Manchester. Police say they're confident her death isn't suspicious. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.202 and 1.187 euros. The price of gold currently stands at £1,478 and 67 pence per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for real-time investment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're on the money here on GB News TV, DAB plus radio and online. It's 1:38. Now, agriculture in the UK has had its fair share of challenges lately, of course, from rising fuel costs, expensive animal feed and fertiliser to unpredictable weather. A recent drought now followed by dangers of flash flooding. And it doesn't end there, because over £60 million worth of food has been wasted over the last 6 months due to a shortage of workers to pick, pack and process crops. That's according to research by the National Farmers Union, no less. The NFU's found that 17% of crop pickers recruited don't actually turn up, while 9% leave their contracts early, with growers predicting a further 4.4% fall in production due to worker shortages next year as well. So here we are with perfectly good food being wasted while families across the country are struggling to feed themselves, and in some areas, food banks are inundated. And although around 38,000 short-term visas are available under this year's seasonal agricultural worker scheme, the farming industry says it needs at least double that number. Well, to discuss this vital issue of food security and food waste, let's hear from Derek Wilkinson. He's Vice Chair for the Horticultural Board at the NFU. Derek, great to have you with us. And Mark Summers is in Buckinghamshire. He's a beef and arable farmer and an agricultural contractor. Let's hear from you first, Derek, if we may. This NFU research, it seems to me you've really highlighted an important trend, the fact that we're wasting lots of money, wasting lots of perfectly good food because of a lack of workers to bring it to market. It seems almost immoral.
It absolutely is immoral. And it's actually, the situation's getting worse. Earlier on in the year, we were ourselves absolutely desperately short of workers. We employ about 700 staff ourselves at the peak. In May, we needed 300 people, and we could only get 120 people. Now, the reasons for that are twofold. One is we had a lot of people due to come to us through the seasonal workers scheme, and they were recruited predominantly from Ukraine. Obviously, due to the war in Ukraine, people couldn't travel. We then had to recruit from other countries, which we would have managed, or we did manage, but then it took 6 to 8 weeks to get a visa processed to get those people into this country, which is just ridiculous. Whereas in Holland, Germany, where they have similar schemes, the governments there can process those visas within a week. So that led to some significant crop losses for our business. It's amounted to 45 tonnes of asparagus, 700,000 bunches of spring onions, with a total value to us of about £250,000. Now, as well as that loss to us, we then had to replace that product with imported product with a higher carbon footprint, and that actually costs more.
Let's go to you, Mark Summers, in Buckinghamshire. You are a beef and arable farmer, as I said. Tell us about the impact of a labour shortage on farming in your part of the country in terms of your business and the businesses of the farmers surrounding you.
Well, it's very similar. Like, we have issues with people just showing up for work, and it's not even just in farming. It seems to be across the board. We have issues getting deliveries of materials, of parts, massive delays on things because it seems that everyone is short-staffed. We have, obviously, there's a sense of urgency with what we're doing when we're harvesting crops. And you have people sometimes just don't turn up for work, and that creates massive logistical issues trying to harvest crops and keep the system moving.
In the past, Mark, a lot of my people, my family's originally from County Mayo. Like yourself, they came over to the UK, helped with farming, they were seasonal workers. We seem to be seeing a lot less of that now. We've just heard from Derek that it's been red tape, it's been visa shortages, time processing, it's taking too long. Is that what a lot of farmers are talking about? The fact that they can't get the staff from abroad because of red tape, because perhaps of Brexit?
Well, that's a big factor. You have Brexit, you have all the red tape that goes with getting a visa. The other thing you have is because of the cost of living, as well, as you were talking about earlier on, it's a massive factor. It's not really worthwhile anymore because the hours are long, the wages aren't really there to match it, and it's just easier to do other things, you know, or even with what we've had with people who have had COVID payments for so long that it's just easier not to work at all. And some people just, I don't like saying it, but can't be bothered, which is quite sad, really.
Let's go back to you, Derek, because of course we only, you know, a lot of people will point to Brexit. I'd say that, you know, we've only had, you know, freedom of movement between the EU and the UK when the UK was a member. It was only for a few years, for generations before that, long before we were in the EU, we managed perfectly well welcoming for overseas workers to the UK from elsewhere. So it's not as if we can't do this outside the European Union. In your view, is it mainly a red tape issue? Is it just a factor of processing these visas, or do you need more visas in the first place? A bigger quota, better executed?
It's a combination of both. We need more rapid processing of visas, but we knew fundamentally we need a lot more visas. We've always had migrant labour to harvest the crops. That's happened certainly throughout my career. And at the moment, we've got, as you pointed out, we've got 38,000 visas available. We, as the NFU, we were lobbying for at least 55,000 for this year. Our total requirement for the industry is about 70,000. The balance has been made up with EU staff that have got settled and pre-settled status. But they are a declining number every year, only about 50 to 60% come back. So we're going to need more people every year through the seasonal workers scheme. And this has always been the case, and I believe it always will be the case. We're told by government that we should be mechanising and we should be employing more British people. We are constantly trying to recruit British people and simply cannot find them. And as regards to mechanisation, as an industry, we've been very successful at mechanising parts, but we still need a huge amount of labour, and we'll continue to mechanise where we can.
Indeed, there are certain soft crops you can only really pick and process and pack to a high standard, but by hand. But what of what Mark Summers just said, Derek? Do you agree that maybe the British workforce is getting a bit soft? When I was a student many moons ago, we would literally go crop picking, and it was really hard work, but you got a good tan, you had a good laugh, you drank a lot of cider, and you made proper money. But it made your back ache. Do students turning up now, are they reliable workers for farmers?
The problem, the big difference between now and when you were talking about is the season for harvesting fresh produce is much longer. So if you take something like strawberries, which used to be just 4 or 5 weeks throughout June and July, now that season is 6 or 7 months long. So the students just don't fit the bill. And yes, it is hard physical work. And if there's easy work out there, people will naturally take that work.
Derek, really, really interesting. Derek Wilkinson there, Vice Chair for Horticultural Board at the National Farmers Union. And Mark Summers joining us from his tractor in Buckinghamshire, beef and arable farmer. Mark, great to have you with us. We will return to this important subject. On the Money takes the plight of British farmers very, very seriously, and indeed our broader food security. Now, after weeks of hot sunshine and even drought in some areas, as I was saying, we do now face predicted heavy rain and thunderstorms. Our weather is far from dull. And some say those weather patterns are being influenced by pollution and even climate change. And fast fashion and disposable clothes, a huge part of our textile industry and indeed globally, it's a sector that's often been criticised as putting too much pressure on the planet. The campaign group Greenpeace have estimated around 300,000 tonnes of clothes in the UK are wasted and end up in landfill to be burned every year. That's a lot of clothes, with fast fashion being the second largest global polluter, according to Greenpeace. Well, that's what inspired Liz McCreevy, previously a fashion designer, to shift from fast to slow fashion, championing a more sustainable and ethical way of making clothes. And she joins me now to talk about Rethreads, her sustainable fashion brand, for our latest episode of Startup Britain. Liz, great to have you with us here in the studio. It's a really interesting area, fast fashion. Now, I know my mum's watching, so just explain to her what fast fashion is.
So fast fashion begins with a trend based on mostly the catwalks. From the point where the catwalks happen, you'll have probably 6 to 8 weeks. High street brands will then create their own trends that interpret what's going on the catwalks, and then we push really quickly to get that product in store. More often than not, quicker than the catwalks actually get into the designer.
So these sort of cheap and cheerful versions of very glamorous clothes that you see in the magazines and on social media and so on. And people, often young people, but not exclusively, will often wear a thing once or twice and then chuck it away.
Yeah, partly to do with the fact that trends change so quickly, which kind of there's like a double-pronged issue there for me, is that it doesn't help people identify their own style. So that's kind of one aspect. But also the other aspect is the make of the clothing. Often, because it's done so quickly, the quality of the fabric's quite poor, the workmanship, not derailing what factories are doing, but sometimes it is, it's less than adequate.
Cards on the table, confession time. Liz McCreevy, co-founder and designer at Rethreads. Were you once a fast fashion addict? I mean, how did you feel?
I worked it.
Buying something and literally chucking it away after one wear, not even washing. If you wash the thing, it will fall apart, right? So, in some cases.
Yeah, so I think because I worked in fashion, a lot of my wardrobe was vintage. I liked vintage. I liked the vintage because it had a history, and I liked it because it was a one-off. And I felt like I had kind of my own style. But I did shop the high street. And I generally didn't throw it away. It would go to charity. It didn't have a lot of spend per wear, I call it, which is like how many times you wear it. I would then, basically pass it on to charity or to a family member. It would never go in the bin, or I'd kind of upcycle it. So it's a slightly better version of the truth, but it's...
But now you're slightly older, if I may mention, and much wiser. Tell us about Rethreads.
So Rethreads is a workwear brand, sustainable workwear brand with massive social value at its core.
You're wearing a Rethreads number, right? I can see the little logo, RT.
Yeah, proudly. So what we do is we look to work with our partner charity Wise Futures, which is a charity that works with young people in care, or care experienced as we refer, and we look to give them meaningful work experience within our brand. We also give a large portion of our profits, 20% minimum per year, to Rise Futures to help support young people through their
we can see some of your products up on the screen there for those of us who are watching us on TV rather than listening on the radio. It's a very modern look. It's kind of classless, if I may say
versatile,
so. And it looks to me pretty intergenerational. You're not going for sort of teens. You're going for people in this mid to late 20s onwards.
It's
funkier than dad wear, if I may say so.
The idea is it's accessible to everyone. So if you just want a plain T-shirt, like if you're like a skateboarder or you're like a surfer or whatever, it just has those like really good basics that you can rely on. We have a lifetime repair model built in, so we'll take them back and repair them for you and then send them back and then kind of look after it at end of life. So the garments, we see it from beginning to end.
But, you're a skilled designer, obviously. You've got a reputation in the industry. Quality costs money, doesn't it, Liz? You need good materials. You need good workmanship.
Yeah.
It takes time.
Yeah.
There's a cost of living crisis going on. How's your business getting on as people's budgets are being squeezed? You are punting, upmarket casual wear.
So generally, I think we position ourselves quite well in terms of the market of other workwear brands. It isn't cheap, but the reason it isn't cheap is our fabrics are sustainable. They're certified cottons. We don't use any plastic. Our buttons are metal. There's zero plastic in what we make.
And that appeals to a lot of people, doesn't it? Particularly younger people.
Yeah, so that's one aspect. We look to give our workers within the factory, we use an ethical factory currently within Turkey, so they have a very fair living wage. It's been audited and we've read the reports, so we have a fully clear landscape of where we sit kind of within our ethical practice. The idea is not about spending lots of money, lots of time.
Yeah.
spend well.
Value for money.
Spend well.
Buy cheap, you buy twice, right? That's
yeah. So it
as my dad used to tell me.
Exactly. It does become a false economy because you end up spending more. So yeah, what we're looking to do is kind of try and gently change mindsets that actually we don't need to have lots. We could just have a bit less and just.
So when did you start the business and how's it going?
Lockdown, middle of lockdown.
Wow.
Lockdown.
That's scary.
Yeah, it was actually. It was an idea that was sparked. So my other co-founder Matt, we started a conversation, kind of seeing where it would go, and we thought there was something in it, so we just kind of pushed forward.
And you're in the shops, or is it only online?
It's online currently. We are going to be having a pop-up shop at the end of September during London Design Festival, which is like a week-long festival that kind of like is the purveyor of design within London.
And what's the future, as Simon Cowell says, though I've got better hair, as Simon Cowell says, what's the dream?
So the dream is we eventually have our own it's my dream, so I'm probably like speaking. The dream is to have our own manufacturing facility within the UK, so we're creating jobs and opportunities beyond what we are doing currently with our factory in Turkey. But the be-all and end-all is that we support as many students through our Rise Futures programme as we can do. So young people who are still within the care system, who are looking to get valuable and meaningful work experience. So we will bring them in, help them learn skills and let them go forth. And
Liz McCreevy, you are the co-founder and designer of Rethreads. You're our latest guest on Startup Britain. It's good to see you.
Thank
and
you
best
so
of luck
much.
with your business.
Thank you.
Liz McCreevy there. Now, lots of you have been emailing in about our main discussion. How can we reverse the nosedive in UK wages? Andrew says we can tackle this problem of real pay by dealing with the spiralling costs of energy. Sanctions on Russia were not thought through, says Andrew. Putin has power over our energy prices. And we have now seen the consequences at home. Sanctions on Russia should be ended sooner rather than later. The cost of energy impacts everything. Tim got in touch to say wages may have fallen 3%, but pensions have dropped by 6%. People without private pensions are suffering real hardship. People need more money in their pockets to spend on the high street, to boost growth and to save the country. Mike got in touch to say instead of locking in high wage increases, why not get employers to fund solar panels for their employees' homes? There's an idea. Thanks to all of you for getting in touch with me with those emails. We'll have more emails and another discussion here on The Money tomorrow, but today that's all we've got time for. Join me tomorrow at 1 p.m. Monday to Friday here on GB News on The Money. I'll be covering that latest inflation number. In fact, I'll be on GB News Breakfast with Eamon Holmes tomorrow morning talking about inflation. But for now, this is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and that was On The Money.
Hello, good morning. I'm Ada McGibbon from the Met Office. The heat wave we had at the weekend seems like a distant memory. It's now cloudier, it's feeling cooler, and rain or showers as well as hit and miss thunderstorms will continue to affect many places during the rest of the day, but not everywhere. Some places will stay dry. Low pressure towards the south is sending some showers and thunderstorms up from the Channel at the moment, and they'll continue to progress north across England and Wales. And I think it's really across the Midlands, parts of eastern and southern England, as well as Wales, where we'll see the greatest risk of thundery downpours, hail, lightning, and some torrential rain in a short space of time. But they'll be hit and miss. In between, there'll be some brighter interludes, some drier interludes. For northern England, Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland, cloudy with some outbreaks of rain, but mostly this will be light and patchy. It will tend to fade away overnight with some clear spells coming in for the far north, along with a cool breeze. Elsewhere, across much of central and southwestern England, South Wales as well, heavy rain continues, perhaps some further thunderstorms as well. Another warm night, not quite as oppressively warm as recent nights, 16 Celsius in the south, 9 or 10 for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. And we start the day on Wednesday with rain or showers